Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Royal Armouries Winter Lecture. I'm Mark Bennett, I'm the Research Manager at the museum, and I'm delighted you to welcome to today's event. Thank you very much to my colleague Jonathan Ferguson for stepping in for me on the previous event, and I hope those of you who are watching are not disappointed to have me back. I'm certainly glad to be back. The Royal Armouries, if you've not come across us before, is the UK's national collection of arms and armour with a history dating back to the Middle Ages. If you're interested in our other online content, or if you'd like to visit our museums in person, all the details are on our website, which is royalarmouries.org. Our winter lecture series will run from now until the end of March 2022, and will cover an eclectic mix of topics relating to arms and armour over the centuries. We'll be looking at everything from Anglo-Saxon swords to missiles steered by artificial intelligence, from the First World War's naval bombardment of northeast England to a Japanese retelling of the King Arthur legend. So as usual, all the talks will be broadcast live on Zoom and YouTube, and they will stay available to watch on YouTube if you're unable to join us on the day. So keep an eye on our website or follow us on Eventbrite to stay up to date with the details. Now, before we start, I should perhaps mention another opportunity which might be of interest to some in our audience. Thanks to a very generous donation by our retiring academic trustee, Professor Anne Curry, we've been able to announce our first postdoctoral research fellowship. This is open to those who've completed a doctorate between September 2019 and October 2021, and offers 9 months of both funding, i.e. salary, and research expenses to support a project looking into the history of arms and armour without restriction of geographical or time period. The deadline is 18th of November 2021. To find out the details, go to tinyurl.com/RA postdoc, which is all one word. So that's RA postdoc. And if you're not interested yourself, please do pass it on to others or post it to discussion groups, boards, forums, that sort of thing. We'd love to give as many people as possible an opportunity to apply for this particular role. So turning back to today's event, you will have a chance to ask questions to the speaker after the talk. If you're watching on YouTube, please type your question in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you're watching via Zoom, you'll find a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen where you can type questions. And as always, while we can't guarantee to get through them all, we will cover as many as we can. So with the necessary preparation out of the way, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today, Jan Jariot. Jan is currently working towards his doctorate at the University of Poitiers, with a thesis dealing with the role of military heritage in civilian society during the centenary of the First World War. Now, he's not a Legionnaire himself, but today's talk draws on his experience working as a civil servant at the French Foreign Legion Museum through a particular set of objects captured in the early 20th century. Now, please do bear in mind that Jan's first language isn't English, but I'm sure you'll be considerate and appreciative of the effort he's making to bring us a very interesting talk. If you do happen to miss anything, then please just add a little note in the questions and we can pick it up after the talk. Likewise, Jan, if I say anything that doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry in the slightest about asking me to clarify. So without any further ado then, I hand you over to Jan Jariot.
Hi everyone, and thank you for welcoming this lecture. I'm very glad to have the opportunity to share a French perspective about military heritage. Just share the, okay. So yes, from a group of weapons seized in Morocco in 1908 and now kept by the Museum of the French Foreign Legion, we will try to understand how warfare impacted the traditions of a military corps and what role can military heritage play in today's society. So first, to begin, a bit of context. During the late 19th century, France was in quest for glory and wanted to regain its place among the great powers, great European powers, after the defeats against Prussia and her allies in 1870. So The young Third Republic resumed what began before the Second Empire and Napoleon III, and the conquest of large territories in Africa, like Algeria in the 1830s and Senegal in the 1850s. At this time, Morocco, at the beginning of the 20th century, Morocco was one of the only European countries to remain free of European occupation and French occupation, despite the heavy control over its finances by European powers. However, Morocco was the theatre of the European colonial rivalry after 1885, especially between France and Germany. So in 1905, the German Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm II met the Sultan Abdelaziz, which increased the conflict between France and Germany. To calm the tensions, a conference was held in Algeciras in 1906. And on this base, General Lyautey began the first phase of the French conquest, effective conquest of Morocco by occupying the city of Oujda in 1907. You can see it on the right corner of this map. The Maxen, the Sultan, was replaced by his brother Abdelhafid, which was more close to the French authority in 1908, but his authority quickly collapsed, and this encouraged the local forces like the Bu Amama tribe. At the end of each part, you will see all the names and the specific terms with eventually dates or whatever. It's in this context, the colonial warfare in North Africa and in the Sahelo-Saharan area was largely based on the small war and guerrilla of the 19th century, early 19th century. Asymmetry, inconsistency, and length characterized what we now call low-intensity conflict. To face decentralized and highly mobile forces with perfect knowledge of the terrain, European troops need to compensate the failure of traditional strategies with large armies. France, like Great Britain, faced a recurrent issue of the art of warfare, which is adaptability. In the late 19th and early 20th century, colonial powers tried to adapt themselves to new forms of conflict born from the end of the expansion and the beginning of the pacification operations. The long expeditions and the life in isolated outposts are part of the identity of the Foreign Legion. Since its creation in 1831, the Legion faced the harsh conditions of the border of the colonial empire. This experience has deeply impacted the traditions, and especially for some regiments like the 2nd Foreign Cavalry Regiment, whose regimental song was named La Colonne, the column. The involvement of the Foreign Legion in these expeditionary forces relied mostly on mounted companies. Despite their name, they did not use horses to move, but donkeys to transport supplies. As you can see here, the Legionnaires mounted companies are on the right side, with a group of camel corps, and so they fought on foot. These units were the spearhead of the conquest and the pacification. They fought against different type of enemies, and they built outposts. These mounted companies were disbanded at the beginning of the 1960s with the complete mechanization of the French army. The 2nd Infantry Regiment keeps the memory of its mounted companies with its mascot, its donkey named Tapanar. The outpost strategy was still in use in Afghanistan, as an example, where the ISAF based its occupation of the territory on forward operating bases, from where patrols were able to contest the hegemony on the land to the Taliban. The effectiveness of this strategy was really limited in face of an invisible, mobile, and well-organized enemy. What we saw in Afghanistan was more or less what happened in North Africa at the beginning of the 20th century. The outposts were manned by the regular infantry regiment, and not especially the Legion. There was a lot of colonial troops to occupy the territory. The column, commanded by Colonel Pierron, took place in the High Gear region in the southeast of Morocco. You can see on this map you have Menaba on the left, on the right, sorry, north of El Mungar. So it's really the border with the French Algeria. This region was the border with the French territory, and this border was fixed by the Treaty of La Marña of 1845. The operations were conducted by the Ain Sefra district and progressed on the northwest line. So from you have Kolom Béchar and through the desert in the northwest, going to Beni Ouzine and Mengoub. So in March 1908, an armed group, or a Arka, was spotted around Ain Cher. The General Vigny, head of the Ain Sefra military district in Algeria, formed 4 expeditionary forces, including the one commanded by Colonel Pierron, which left Talzaza at the beginning of May. Under Captain Maury, the 24th Company consisted of 4 officers and 223 NCOs and other ranks. The column arrived at the palm grove of Menaba the 14th of April, after about a week of march. The day of the 15th was dedicated to the laying of the camp and unfolded without incident. As you can see on this picture, it is the desert, so the men had to dig trenches and put up the tents, etc. The next day, so the 16th, around 5 a.m., shots were fired at them, and the Moroccan horsemen were positioned on the southeast of the position. The 1st platoon on the 24th Company was sent to flank the enemy, and at the beginning of the assault on the southeast hill, you can see the hill far behind the men on this picture. The Lieutenant Coste, commanding the 1st platoon, was killed but with the reinforced with the 2nd platoon, the group still managed to take the hill. By the end of the morning, the Bouhamama have withdrawn, and 11 men of the 24th Company were killed and 21 wounded. Some of them died during their transport to Colombéchar, and 24 rifles and 26 swords were seized during the assault. I'll let this slide a little bit if you want the names. Among the captured weapons, we recover a smoothbore musket and a Remington rolling block, identified thanks to pictures taken just after the battle in 1908 and in the Museum of the French Foreign Legion in Algeria in Sidi Bel Abbès in the 1930s. Moreover, Captain Andolenko wrote a book in the 1913s where he was oversaw while he oversaw the museum. He was the first curator of the museum. So these are the two of the weapons we from Menaba we recovered. On the left, it is what we call a mukala. It's the smoothbore rifle, smoothbore musket. It presents a British-made flintlock with the stamps Tower and GR. This suggests that it was probably a brown-based lock sold as spare parts on the markets in the north of the country. In the late 19th and early 20th century, Moroccan trade mostly relied on import, and in 1887, in the port of Larache near Tangier, weapons trade amounts to about £5,000, maybe £6,000, and 10 years later, we can consider that these weapons came primarily from Europe. Maritime trade with Great Britain could explain the proportion of the British-made gun parts used for manufacturing the mukalas. This musket is made from a wooden stock with bone or ivory butt plate. You can see at the bottom of the picture here. And it is really simple in the ornamentation. It's quite different from some of the weapons you can see in the north of the country, which are really the decorative pattern are more abundant. And as the forests are quite abundant in the country, there is almost no import of wood in late 19th century in Morocco, so the stock should come from the Moroccan forest. Finally, the triangular shape of the stock suggests that it was manufactured in the Tétouan region, because it is typical of this area, the triangular shape of the stock. We lack information to clearly determine where all the parts and where all the parts comes from and where it was different parts was assembled. It is a problem because by extension we can't connect it to a specific tribe, so we are not sure that it was only one group, one tribe at the Battle of Menaba. The second rifle, so it's a Remington rolling block, you can see on the right. We could determine the origin of this rifle thanks to the picture earlier quote, and it is more complex. We know a lot about its origin. We are not sure because there are no records or whatever, but we have some clues. We identified these weapons thanks to the brass nails on the stocks. Now they have disappeared, but there are still dark marks on the stock you can see here, and the pattern is really easy to identify and to compare. This rifle presents an engraved floral pattern on the bolt, you can see on the left. There are no markings or serial numbers, and we could not check the inside of the rifle because it was neutralized, so we can't just open it and check the serial numbers. This gun suffered no modification other than cosmetic changes, especially on the sights, which could be sometimes the case, like in the Sudan during the Mahdist era in the 1880s or at the beginning of the 1890s, where the sights were often removed and the barrel was often shortened. On each of the bands holding the barrel to the stock, you can see here on the right, there are some kind of stamps that could be the signature of the artist who decorated the weapons, but we are not sure about that. It is chambered in 43 caliber, which suggests or a Egyptian model or a Spanish model. Just yes. This rifle could have an unexpected origin, because by the end of the 1870 war against Prussia, France faced a shortage of weapons and bought large amounts of Chassepot, Martini Henry, or Sharp and Remington to private sellers in England and in the US. Few years after the defeat, these weapons became obsolete when the Gras model 1874 was issued with new cartridges. Hence, a decree was enacted in November 1872, which allowed the state armories to sell all the weapons to bail out the national bank. Among the weapons sold at this time, we find more than 100,000 of Egyptian Remington. When these weapons were sold, they just vanished. So it's possible that some of them crossed the Mediterranean Sea to be sold in Africa. It was quite common at the time. This assumption is reinforced by the fact that the Remington from Menaba is an Egyptian model. More than the caliber, which is close to the Spanish Remington, this rifle supports a Type 2 bolt with the hammer in the axis of the block. You can see here this part. I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing. And the ejector is placed in a slot on the left of the block, which is this part here. And this is typical of the Egyptian Remingtons. If maritime trade and maritime legal import provides part of the weapons sold in Morocco, most of them seems to be introduced illegally. In 1895, smuggling was a real danger for France in Algeria because of strong exchange networks between Moroccan and Algerian tribes. After the defeats against Spain in 1860, smuggling could have escalated to bypass increasing European control and unfavorable trade balance established by the Wadras Treaty. Smuggling continues to be an issue to the French rule in Algeria at the beginning of the 20th century. In September 1905, France and Germany agreed to organize surveillance and repression of weapon smuggling in the region, along with Morocco. In 1905, smuggling took place mainly in the area close to the port of Tangier in the north. Before the creation of the first museum of the French Foreign Legion, each regiment had its own Hall of Honor. For the first regiment, it was in Sidi Bel Abbès in Algeria, and the first Hall of Honor was created by Colonel Vatringue in 1888, but the building was only inaugurated in 1892. It was built by the Legionnaires and funded by them thanks to the donation of the equivalent of 1 day of salary. The first museum was created in the 1930s as an extension to the Hall of Honor in Sidi Bel Abbès. The main novelty consisted in the campaigns room where artifacts were exposed, and the Hall of Heroes, presenting officers, NCOs, and other ranks who died in action since 1831. The will to develop the Hall of Honor and to transform it into a museum took place in a time of splendor and a period of influx of new recruits, essentially coming from Russia, because in the 1920s, the civil war in Russia, a lot of white Russians came to France. This increase of new legionnaires resulted in the creation of 4 new regiments, like the 1st Cavalry Regiment in 1922. Moreover, the museum was officially unveiled shortly after the centenary of the Legion and the inauguration of the War Memorial in 1931. The milestone of the century and the trauma of the First World War probably encouraged the Legion to claim its legitimacy as a pillar of the French military action around the world and as an elite unit by exposing its past. Despite the new museum, each regiment kept its own Hall of Honor as a relay to a global history. It is still the case, and for each regiment of the Foreign Legion, you have one room, one kind of small museum. With the museum, the Legion became a full part society. It already has its own rules, but now it has its own history and its own traditions. At the end of the Algerian War of Independence in 1962, the Legion moved largely to southern France. A new Quartier Vienno, a new camp, was built in Aubagne, near Marseille in southern France, and the foundation stone of a new museum was laid in 1963 by the Ministry of War, Pierre Mesmer. In April 2013, an extension and a new scenography were revealed to the public. Once again, the funding relied on the loyalty of the Legionnaires and the motto More Maiorum, like the elders, inscribed on the front of the building. So here you can see on the front, on the left, the War Memorial, and on the right, the new part of the museum, the recent part of the museum. With its repatriation in France, at the end of a continuous period of war, since from the 1920s to 1962, the museum finds a new role. So far, it was a mirror made for Legionnaires, and by the Legionnaires. It was a temple where relics of the glorious days were kept, and a pantheon for the heroes who died on the battlefield. But with the opening to the civilian public in the 1960s, the museum became a window for the Legion on the outside world and for the civilian on the fantasized military corps. More than just heritage institution, it is a meeting point for two different worlds. The topography of the museum translates that new function with two entries, one on the outside for the civilian public and one on the inside for the military personnel. The new function is also a communication, because the Foreign Legion never, before 1962, was never in metropolitan France. Always in Algeria, in Indochina, or in the Pacific. So it is a medium to say who they are and to maybe to promote a new image. It's not only legionnaires waging war around the world. Because you bear in mind that the 1960s, it's flower power and pacifist movements. The museum has lost particularity, which follows the logic of meeting point. Since 2013, the Hall of Honor is in the museum, and as it punctuates the life of the Legionnaires, the Hall of Honor is at the end of the exhibition path. So now the museum, when you visit the museum, you just follow the life of the institution, but also of the life of the men, from the beginning and the signature of the first contract, and to the end, and the certificate of good conduct. The museum is really central in the life of the Legionnaires. As I just said, it's where you sign your first contract, and it's where the certificate of good conduct is delivered. But during your time in the Legion, you will frequently go to the museum. As an example, it is a required passage for the applicants to the rank of major. Major is an NCO rank in the French army. It's not officers. And this Hall of Honor, this new Hall of Honor, is a window space. So when there is a ceremony, because each week it's used for ceremonial matters, the public can see what is happening in the room. So the museum is also a theater where key events of the life of the men is depicted. So the set of Menaba entered the heritage collections of the Foreign Legion shortly after the battle. So at this time, the museum didn't even exist. At the end of the expedition, each unit retrieved the weapons they have captured, and on almost 50 weapons seized, only 4 Winchester repeating rifles, 1 revolver, and 1 sword remained at the Colombesha outpost, whereas the rest was sent to Sidi Bel Abbès to integrate this collection. Since then, the set of Menaba was always exposed in the exhibition. And during the 1980s, there is almost no changes in the scenography since 1963, and the set was still on display. It's only more than a century after the Gear expedition that the weapons from Menaba were retired from the main exhibition to be placed in the reserves. At this stage, the origin of the set was already almost lost because of the scattering of the original set. So, in conclusion, colonial warfare deeply impacted the traditions of the French Foreign Legion, from the songs to the regimental celebrations. The museum is an important part of the French Foreign Legion because it is a guardian of its identity as well as a communication medium. Although the Legion was not a colonial corps like the Moroccan or Algerian tirailleurs, or the Spy or the Marine Infantry, most of its past was spent taking part to colonial expeditions. The reserves of the museum are full of pieces of this past, which are also a part of the French history and of the European history and African history. And in a time of tensions about the colonial past of the European countries, like France or United Kingdom, it is also a guardian of a wider memory. The military museums, like the Museum of the French Foreign Legion or the Museum of the Marine Infantry, are a bridge between military and civilian society to help. It is now one of the missions of this kind of museum. It's to help the civilian society to understand its military past. History and heritage should be a meeting point and an open door on a reflexive and comprehensive debate to accept and to do the memory work. I put, yes, the names. If you're interested in visiting the French Foreign Legion Museum, I put the different link for the website, social networks, and there is also a virtual visit. And I encourage you to pay a visit to the museum in Aubagne or other French military museums, because it seems to be quite different that we can find maybe in Austria, in Germany, or in United Kingdom. In France, there is no Royal Armouries museum. There is no museum dedicated to arms and armor, so the collection are, you can find arms and armor collections in every military museum or even civilian museum. And if you are interested in the news for the Foreign Legion, check the social networks, because the museum is really active on the social on the internet for the new exhibitions and partnerships with the museum like the Army Museum in Paris. And I think it is time. So thank you very much for listening.
Not at all. Thank you, Jan. I know you've put a lot of work into this talk, and we're very, very grateful to you for delivering it. It's a fascinating subject, and you've got some beautiful and really historically resonant objects in there. However, if the audience will pardon me, I'm going to start off by talking about museums, if that's okay. Most British regiments will have a museum of their own, so quite small ones, but something dedicated to them. Is the French Foreign Legion unusual in having its own museum?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
No problem. So a lot of British regiments, so the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, the York and Lancaster, they will have their own individual museum. Is the French Foreign Legion unique or unusual among French regiments in having its own museum?
In France, there is the French Foreign Legion and the Marine Infantry Museum. They are really, it is really specific to these two institutions because they have really their own traditions and their own past, because it's basically colonial troops. So they fought in every war in the French history since their creation. But there is also the schools museum and the academy museums, like for NCOs, for officers. And then you have the museum of the different corps, like the artillery museum, the radio museum, and so on. And everyone is depends. Sorry, each of these museums depends on the same central service in Paris, and it is the Ministry of War that deals with these museums.
Yeah, no, fascinating. And what you said about modern Legion and the museum interesting, because we run a program for people who are just starting out in the British Army. But I was wondering, how much does the museum cover modern wars, modern campaigns, Afghanistan, Mali, that sort of stuff?
In Aubagne, you'll find a room for the First and the Second World War, because it is so big for the Legion, because the French Foreign Legion was the first military troop to join the Free French. So it is really important in the history of the Legion. And the First World War, it's very important also because there is no each man that served in the Legion in the past and today were volunteered to that. So that's a lot of people. And there is in Aubagne, it's not the case everywhere like in Paris in the Army Museum. There is one or two rooms about the decolonization wars in the China, in Algeria in the 1950s and 1960s. Even it's a bit now it is a bit tricky to talk about that because there is real tensions about that. But there are two rooms about.
And focusing on these objects, the set of Menhaba, were they kept so long because of the quality of the weapons or the significance of Menhaba as an event to the
Menhaba was this battle, or it is more a skirmish than an actual battle. But this set was almost forgot since this work, because we just found those weapons in the reserves, and there is no real. It's not an important battle or in the history of the Legion, but it is part of a long period of war, of expedition, and there is a lot of expedition, almost not each year, but almost each year at the beginning of the 20th century. Doc, it's part of a wider phenomenon.
If you don't mind me asking, what made you interested in these particular objects?
It was first because the Mukalla was sent for restoration, I think we say. So we need to have more information about this rifle. And then I continued because that's remind me my master degree on colonial warfare in the Sudan, and I, I thought it was interesting to have some common points between the East Africa and Western Africa. It's not the same period, but few years, same period, and how the heritage and the relationship between the Legionnaires and military personnel to military heritage, but particularly to weapons, because for them it is a tool. It's not collections and they they they're not using gloves. If you give an old weapon to a legionnaire, yes, it's a rifle, but it's not of an interest of any kind.
And obviously, the weapons are relevant to the modern legionnaire, but also very significant to the people who held them. It's interesting that you've got such a wide mix of weapons between the very old musket and the relatively new rifle. The musket, would that have been held onto because it was particularly significant to the person who carried it, or was it just that they couldn't get anything better?
That's an interesting point because on all the weapons seized in Menaba, there is more Remingtons or Martini. There is one Martini Henry, if I remember well. There is more modern weapons than old Mukalas, and it's interesting because there is some kind of there is an evolution, and I think it's a proof that the North African tribes, horsemen, were still attached to the fantasia and all symbolic shows, I guess, but they need to adapt to the new European weaponry. And there is always maybe one generation late on European weapons because it's not repeating rifles, but it's not craftsmanship, it's industrial weapons. And I think it is really interesting. And about the symbolic, the patterns in the ornamentation on the Remingtons are really close to what you can find on old Mukalas.
Say the other weapons in the set, so the other rolling block rifles, the Martini Henry. So I take it they're also decorated in similar ways.
Yes. It was difficult to identify the weapons because of the similar patterns in the decorative ornaments, and on the actually these two weapons are the only two we can surely identify as taken in Menaba.
And the native of Morocco that the French were fighting, did they have their own cultures of these, or was it just a case of they would take rifles from the battlefield that were useful?
At the beginning of the 20th century, it is for the collections of the Hall of Honor. It's no more for to use them. like it was the case maybe in the 1860s in the during the Mexican expedition. And there is a letter from the Captain Maury, which was in command of the 24th Company, to the colonel in Sidi Bel Abbes. And the captain said, we have 50 or 24 rifles. Do you want me to send them to you? And it's really it's organized. And when they took a weapon, at this time it was on purpose to send them to the collection, because there is a symbolic behind that. I think it is that the name of the captain and the company is inscribed on the wooden panel in the exhibition. So it's I think a way to enter the big history of the institution.
That's fascinating. And so I don't know if the Legion were ever defeated in these particular campaigns, or if the Arabs in fighting among themselves would take trophies as well, but presumably taking weapons from your opponent is a standard thing throughout the world, wherever you go.
I think there is two approach. It's when you need the weapon because you may be out of ammunition or your rifle doesn't work, and there is the symbolic. And I think during the First World War, in the trenches, taking a weapon, for the French army, maybe it's different in all the systems. It was a necessity. You take maybe the machine gun because you don't have a machine gun. And in low intensity conflicts, the period of actual fights are maybe more rare, and it's a skirmish, and so you can maybe think a little more to the symbolic and the prestige. But I think it's I think it's a global phenomenon to take a weapon. Maybe it's not for the symbolic, but for the utility and the necessity. But I think it's quite you can find this around the world.
Absolutely. And one of the things you relatively in the wider French army interested me, because in the British army in the sort of 19th century, there was quite a lot of tension between those officers who fought in India and those who stayed at home or focused on the European conflicts like the Franco-Prussian War. Was command in North Africa or service with the Legion a way of getting to command elsewhere, or were African officers looked down upon?
I'm sorry, could you repeat, please?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Maybe sounds.
I was going to say, my internet is a little bit terrible, so apologies to anyone at home who's missing anything as well. I was just saying, was service in North Africa normally a way of getting to other service elsewhere or to high rank in the army, or were officers who had served in Africa looked down upon?
For the Foreign Legion, during the 19th century, almost all the officers were French. At the beginning, all the officers were French. It was in the decree for the creation of the Legion. But during late 19th century and especially during the First World War, they just need officers. And the Legionnaires, the were, I don't know if I can say that like that, but they are a particular species of military personnel, because it's 150 nationalities and speeches and whatever. So you need some time to have officers coming from the ranks. And I think the military hierarchy understood that quite early. And in the real colonial troops like marine infantry, or it was worse in the Moroccan, in the Chinese tirailleurs, because it was really hard for an Algerian soldiers to even be in NCO, like sergeant. So it was almost impossible for an Algerian to become an officer, but it was possible in the Legion, because there is you need those men to rule the other men, because they understand them. They are one of them. The foreign officer is one of them.
No, I think it's fair to describe the Legion as somewhat separate. I'm sure that they themselves, having their own museum, their own traditions, would like to set themselves somewhat apart from the rest of the French army. So that brings me to the end of the questions, and we're coming up to just about 3 o'clock. So I think, Jan, unless you've got anything else to add, we can probably end it there.
No, I think everything was said.
Good. Perfect. Well,
Almost
as I said,
everything.
I was going to say, no doubt you've got plenty more that you'd like to say on the topic. If you've got any social media, a Twitter handle or anything like that you'd like to share, feel free to do. Alternatively, if you don't use social media, then congratulations, neither do I.
Actually, I don't.
Very sensible, that, especially if you're doing a doctorate, because it can just kill your productivity. So,
yeah.
But we very much appreciate you coming along today, delivering a presentation on some absolutely fascinating objects in a language that isn't your first. And I wish you all the best for your ongoing studies, and good luck.
Thank you. I hope everyone understood what I was saying, because that was a bit difficult sometimes.
Given my internet, they probably understood you better than me. Apologies for any outages that I might have suffered. But yes, so thank you to Jan for today's lecture. Thank you also to Adam for producing the event behind the scenes, and to you, the audience, for taking time out of your day to attend and for listening to our speakers so carefully and considerately. Thank you also to everyone who's donated as a result of these winter lectures. We really appreciate your support, and it goes towards preserving the collection for future generations to enjoy. For any questions that you may have that we weren't able to cover today, if it's weapons or warfare related, then inquiries@armouries.org.uk will get you in touch with one of our curators. If you'd like to check out the French Foreign Legion Museum, follow the links Jan's provided. I checked the virtual tour, and although the labels unfortunately are in French, but Google Translate will hopefully get you through if you are interested in seeing it without visiting France. And please do remember the Jean Curry Memorial Fellowship, tinyurl.com/RA postdoc, and either check it out or pass it round as appropriate. Our next event will be on Wednesday, the 20th of October, when David Lister will discuss the PIAT, the Projector Infantry Anti-Tank, and whether it was the best platoon-level anti-tank weapon of the Second World War. For details of this and all our future events, keep an eye on our website, which is royalarmouries.org. Follow us on the social media network of your choice, unless you're sensible and don't use them, and consider following us on Eventbrite. In the meantime, thank you again for spending time with us today, and we look forward to seeing you on the 20th of October.